So we're going to do something a little bit different this week. We're getting up towards 3,000 subscribers and I'm getting lots and lots of comments. So I'm going to answer some of those comments. They're going to relate to Forger and Nomad. And one of the things we're going to focus on is answers to 3D printing questions. So we're going to give away a couple of files with this. So scaled models you can use with your 3D printing. So follow along, look at what other people are asking and see if it answers some of your questions. First question, probably two questions actually, is about 3D printing. So if we open a file in Nomad, how do we get it in and out for 3D print, and how do we know about scaling, etc.? So what we've done this week is I'm going to give you a few files. There's about 5 or 6 files that you'll find in the comments down below, and those files are just like a base of a model, or we've got a skull in there and just some stands for 3D printing, all scaled to suit almost all 3D printers. So if that's something that you want to have a look at, then just use our files, and this is how you use them. So go put them anywhere you like on your iPad. Go into here and hit open from import, and then we'll pick the skull base 505080. What does that give us? So this is quite a slightly higher res than all the other ones. This is the highest res one I've given you. And this is a 2-part piece, so it's a stand and a skull. And the skull is very, very rudimentary. It's just designed to get you going with the right kind of what we call key landmarks. So where does the nose start? Where's the eye sockets? Where's the mouth located? And you can just work on top of that and then use the tips and tricks that we've shown you over the last few weeks to sculpt on that, and then you can export that for 3D print. So why is that useful? So if you now export, so same panel, so come down to the project and then you go to export instead of import. Now you've got two options here really. You've got OBJ and STL are the two that you really want to focus on. STL will be absolutely fine, but quite often you might have some color on this. So if you export it as an OBJ, that would mean that it will carry all of the paint as well. So you might be wanting to use it to send it to ZBrush or Blender, so or whatever program you use that uses that color. So OBJ is absolutely fine for most jobs, including what we're doing here, 3D printing. So I've sent it out. So switch it over to your PC or Mac, depending on what you've got, and you can see this is a piece of software called Chitubox. Version 1.6.5.1. It's a free 3D printing slicing software. I use it, it's very new to me. I come from a Formlabs 3D printing background, and I started with old machines called MakerBots. And now I'm moving into this machine, this slicing software is going to what we call a Mars, an Elegoo Mars Pro, which is my latest printer. And what we've basically got here is the file imported. So I just went open from here and it brings it in. And what you'll notice there is these squares on the bottom are a centimetre across. So it doesn't take much to work out from that shadow there that this is 50 across. So if you remember, the skull was a 50mm base. So there you go, straight away it's scaled. Now if you'd sculpted on that, just bear in mind, depending on what printer and software you're using here, you've got to stay within those parameters. So if you sculpt something with big horns, it's not going to fit within this box. So you just need to be aware of that. This software is great. I'll show you while I'm in here. So you've got hollowing software here. So you can just hit hollow and look what it does there. So it's basically working it all the way down. It's hollowed both pieces, the head, the skull bit and the stand, and you can slide it down here and have a look at that. So that shows you where your slices are. So that's always very useful. And then also it's got this bit here, which is dig a hole. So you can just add a hole top and bottom. You quite often have to do this, not as big as I've just done there usually. But it's good for drainage while you're printing, so you would normally put holes in it a lot smaller than that, and that's before you add the supports. Now I haven't done anything about orientation or how you would do this correctly. You would need to add supports. I'll just automate it here to show you, but you would want to spend a bit more time doing it than that. But that's exactly how we would do it from Nomad. So it's a very, very simple thing to get it from Nomad out and scaled correctly if you use something like the templates I've given you. So have a look at those stands. Let's just switch back to the iPad for a second. Now we'll open up another one. So let's go back and we'll open up just a 50 by 50 by 5 and see what that gives us. It's just coming in because it's loading from the iPad. Now 50 by 50 by 5 is just a tile. So that's basically giving me a 5 centimeter by 5 centimeter tile. And you can sculpt on that, and you can, you know, if that's one of the other questions that this part was about terrain. So if you've now got, if you sculpt terrain for miniatures, or if you know, whether it's just a base for your 3D print, this is giving you a great start because you now know that that's a 50mm base. And it's going to come in and go out exactly the same. So when it comes in at 50mm, it goes out at 50mm, and you can get that into your slicing software as well. So these are great little files just to give you a starting point for scaling. So what I would suggest is you put all of these files on your iPad and keep them there in a folder called scale tests or scale, so that you always know that you've got something to start with and starting correctly, and you don't have to worry about measuring and stuff like that. So that's the first one, and that covers off getting stuff for 3D printing in and out. Okay, one of the next questions then was about how do you paint. So let's just take a look at, we'll use the skull that we used, that I'm giving you this week, so there's no reason why we can't have a look at that. So painting is very, very simple. So we'll take this skull, and if you look here under this one, sorry, get there in a second. So scene, you've got the skull and you've got the base. So whatever you're on and is highlighted is the one that you're going to be painting on. So instead of painting on it as I gave it, if you basically want this skull, it's down below, as I said in the earlier session. But if you want to paint on this, you'll probably need to make it higher resolution than what I gave you. So all I did there was go to topology, and I hit subdivide here twice. Now if you look here, it says scene faces 1.06 million. So I've done it enough to give me quite a few polygons. And that's because we're doing what's called vertex painting, or in ZBrush it's called poly painting. And we're painting the vertices, the points that make up this model. So the more points you've got, the more colour you'll get. So that's a good thing to start with. So just make sure that your symmetry is on, because it's a symmetrical model. And then you would hit paint, and you're now painting. Now what you could do is, you could just come down here on the right, and you could just pick a colour and just start painting. And that will be pretty much okay for most of what you want to do. You can increase and decrease your brush, so you could literally come all the way. Or you could, let me just change the colour a little bit, I'll go a bit darker. Just check that it's dark, yeah. You could come up here, and you could go on the second one, paint, and you could say paint all, and that'll flood it with the colour, but it will also flood it with the material you're on here as well, so be aware of that. So if I was to choose this metal, for example, with the red and just do paint all, that's now taken, because I changed it there, it lost the red here and just gave me that default. So what you'd want to do is make sure you're on that metal, change the red, go back to it, and then paint all. And you can see that it's painted it there. So let me just take that back to a more flat colour. So take it back to white for us. Okay, so we'll just do what we did again there. We'll just paint it up. And I'm just literally whizzing across the surface with the paint. And then changing the colour. Painting like so. You can see how it went outside the eye there. So you might want to go back, pick a colour here, and then paint that back. So it basically is just like painting in the real world. There's not a huge difference to that there, but this is where it gets quite cool really, because hang on, I'm just gonna change that bit there, just so we've got a nice black hole. I'm going to do the nose as well. Is we've got alphas which are down here. Now, I've got quite a few loaded in here, so I have a lot from ZBrush and a lot from Photoshop, ones that I've purchased over the years and ones that I've made myself. Now, how you would really go to town with your painting and really enhance what you're doing is by using alphas like this. And to load them in, you simply put them into your default folder, which is usually in Nomad and then alphas on your iPad. And when you start Nomad again, presuming they're the correct format, and these are all, most of these are JPEGs, you'll find that you've got lots of them appearing if you've put them in. So then what we can do then is we'll choose a color. So we'll choose a lighter red and then a lower intensity, and you'll see what happens now when I paint is that you start to get, you can just see it there, the scratchy effect is because whatever that alpha has got is what's being used to drive the paint. So wherever it's white, it's adding the paint, wherever it's black, it's not. And that's basically how we do it. That's how we add the paint, and we use, that's almost like making a specific paintbrush that you like by giving it the bristles, the shape that you want. And that'll do you for nearly all of your painting. It's great, usually I would say, to take your time and build up layers rather than trying to do it all in one go. So you do one colour, and especially if you're doing flesh, put colours underneath. So you put yellows at the tops and then go over reds around the cheeks, blues around the jawline, the chin, that kind of thing, and then back over the top with a skin colour or a skin colour with a bit more grey in it, and then very low intensity, and then over the top of that. Too low actually, there you can't even see it. You can see there, as much as it's getting rid of what the work that we were doing, you can still see it coming through, and that's quite a common technique that we've talked about quite a lot. I'll just go a bit lighter with it around the tops of these. So wherever it's aiming to the top, I've made it a bit lighter, as you can see. And that'll do you for most of your painting. There are one or two other little pointers that I'll go through with you now. But have an experiment, make your own in programs like Procreate. Grab textures off the internet from animals and just make them black and white and with a black edge, and you can use those. And that's a really good start to this. One way to enhance that, if you were to pick a very specific one, so let me show you something. This is like crocodile skin, for example. And come up to the top and look down on this menu, which is the paint settings. At the bottom, you can go to grab dynamic radius, go a higher intensity so you can really see what we're doing. And then what happens now is you can see how I'm dragging that across. Let's do it on the red area and you'll see exactly what I mean. You can see that. And that's how you start to add texture of a specific type. So we'll try another one. We'll do a scale pattern this time with a really strong white colour, and you can see there's the pattern. So that's useful in lots and lots of ways, really. So it's really up to you to start building up your library of alpha brushes and things for skin, things for rocks, all sorts of different brushes that you'll put together and use over the time that you're learning this. But remember that's up here in your paint settings, and that's between dot and grab dynamic radius. You'll probably get everything that you need to be able to do this kind of painting. So one little question that I took was, we did a video of mirror and symmetry in Nomad, but what about in Forger? So one of the benefits, or one of the tools that Forger does have that Nomad currently doesn't have, is the ability to flip on X. And what does that mean? Well, flip on any axis actually. If you click on here, on your symmetry button, you get the ability to do X, Y, and Z symmetry, which is great. It means you can work on it up and down, left and right, back to front. But you can also hit this button here and mirror. So I could, if I did it on Y, which is up and down, I can just hit mirror and it would do this. It just flips it all the way around. So I'll just undo that. The one that you would use the most, or the time that you would use that the most, is when you'd want to do something like this, which is come into here, mirror, we don't want to use Y, we want to use X, and then flip it across. So sometimes it's just worth flipping it back into across X. Nomad, you have to mirror it across and then delete something out, so it's not as simple. But that's it's a good one to know. You can see there's a little error where the eye is popping out, so you wouldn't want to do that without fixing it. So we'll pop it back. But that's a great a good one to know in Forger, and it's a great way of just flipping your model to check it to see if it looks accurate, which we do a lot in 2D and drawing. We quite often flip the image in Photoshop just to, or whatever program you use, just to see what it looks like on those different orientations. So do the same in 3D, flip it a lot, and as I'm showing you here, in Forger it's straightforward there on the screen. So how do we use Matcaps in Forger? This is another one. It can apply to Forger and Nomad, and obviously many other programs outside of the iPad sculpting world. So if you've got a model and you want to use a matcap, which if you don't know, a matcap is a material that's driven by an image. So it's usually a sphere and it's lit in a certain way, and that lighting is transferred onto your model and baked onto your model. So how do we make one? So if you go into Forger and you look down here at materials, and then make a little new material by plus, and then lit sphere, and you get an option here to make one. So you can just basically pick one of the ones you've got in there, and that will give you, or you basically can load it in from your resources, and if you add it into your, let me just show you so that you can see exactly what I mean. In your iPad Forger folder, you'll find any that you've created. If you put them in there and then go back to Forger, you'll find them appearing there once you've rebooted. So pick the one that you want. So we'll just pick this red one, and you basically now apply that to your model. So you back out of it, and then you take that with your finger and drag it across and drop it on, and that's now being lit by that image. So your painting's still there to some degree, but it's basically being driven by the image that you see there. So the highlight, the specular highlight you see on the top right, is giving us all these white highlights, and it's making it glossy. Whereas the one that we started with, which is this pink one, doesn't have a highlight, and you can see it's much more like a dead flat skin tone. So that's how you do it in Forger, and it's very simple, but very powerful if you learn how to paint your own matcaps. Next question really was, after we did the trim video last week, somebody was asking about the split tool, which is this one, or split brush, which is next to the trim. And I deliberately didn't include that because I was going to do a separate video. Now, I don't think it needs a full video, so it'd be a great thing to talk about here. So it's, if you know how to do the trim, and if you remember, the trim is basically click trim, and over here you've got line, rectangle, ellipse, all of the different ones. So ellipse, for example, would give you this. It just basically allows us just to trim away whatever we've covered over. So if it was the square one, you can see just trims it away nicely. So I'm going to put that back. Now the split is exactly the same tools. You can see them there on the right. They look exactly the same, but what it does is this. So you go trim, and you can see, because I keep the outline selection on, you can see what's happened there is that the trim has made, instead of deleting it, it's just made it a separate tool. So now, as you can see, that top bit there is just a separate cap. So that can be quite useful for doing things like separating an arm for 3D printing. You still have to then put your keys inside, you still would have to do the pegs, but at least it's separated it off nicely with a very clear, especially if you're high res like this is, you've got a very clean line there to work with. And if you just go back to this model and then go back to the split again, and we'll do something like the line split, for example. You just split it through the face like that, and that just shows you there, you know, you've gone and split all the way through there, and it's giving you a separate piece. So useful for when you're modelling as well. So if you wanted to remove that jaw, then you've just done it. That's as simple as that. And you just go back to your move tool and just move these back up, and that's really quite. I mean, in no other way, if that's the only way you used it, that's actually quite useful for that, really, just for splitting down your character. So that's as simple as the split brush gets, really. It's exactly the same, as I said: lasso, line, rectangle, ellipse, and polygon, and you're basically going to use it to separate out parts of the mesh, exactly as we did with the split tool, with the trim tool, but just splitting it instead. So that's a few questions answered. Hopefully yours was one of them. I'll keep doing these every few weeks, and I might do 2 videos on a day when there's a question video, but that gets a lot of the ones that have been asked by multiple people. These are the files that I'm going to give you. It's 5 base files, and they're all scaled, ready for Chitubox, which is a slicing software that we've mentioned. And if you open them up in Forger or Nomad and then sculpt on them and then just export them back out, they will be scaled correctly for real world 3D printing in most cases. It won't be for everyone, but I think you'll find that nearly everyone will be fine for most use cases. So enjoy the files. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if it helps you. Let me know if comments is something that you want me to do again, or whether it's not going to be useful to you. Subscribe to the channel, obviously. We're up nearly to 3,000 now, which is so exciting considering we've only been going for a couple of months really. And then if you would hit that notification bell, I'm going to let you know when we upload new videos every week, which at the moment is the VR ones on a Wednesday, and we're doing a lot of iPad sculpting on a Friday. So have a great week, and I'll see you on the other side.